Thank you so much, Vanessa. I just want to tell you all, I am so in awe of the team here at Silicon Flatirons. What you don't see behind the scenes is the last minute technical glitches that have me running with high anxiety, and they just handle them with perfection. So I want to start with a big thank you to the team. And I'm about to welcome you all, but before that, I do want to start by acknowledging that wherever we are throughout the world, the country, we are meeting on the lands of First Nations peoples. The traditional peoples of the land here in Boulder are the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute nations. And I'd like to pay particular respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, who lead these communities. And now welcome to our Legal Code event. This is still a relatively new series, combining the strengths of Silicon Flatirons with the expertise of the organizations in our community to inspire new and thoughtful conversations. And I'm really thankful to our partners at Kelley Drye for helping make today's conversation happen. Today, we'll be highlighting an issue of central importance to all of our modern lives, one that has reached, I think, a new level of public consciousness as connectivity has really acted as a lifeline, there's a spoiler for you, over the past year. And so that is going to be this issue around equity and affordability of internet access. I feel this issue very personally. I was raised in rural Florida, an area where broadband is kind of a foreign word. I've watched my mother struggle first with dial-up and on a line of quote unquote high-speed options, from putting hotspots around her house to satellite, and to this day she still struggles to connect. I speak with her, and I'm really glad that there are smart people like the one you're going to hear from today thinking about these issues, and I'm glad we can highlight some of them. I also want to take a second to encourage you all to take advantage of the AirMeet networking session that will take place following today's panel. It's going to give you a chance to communicate more directly with one another, engage on this topic. These have been a lot of fun, but we need you to show up because you're the ones who make the conversations happen. And so I'm really looking forward to chatting with you all a little bit more there one-on-one. So as I mentioned, our co-host for today's event is Kelley, Drye, and Warren. It's a privilege to turn over the mic to John Heitmann. I've worked with John for several years now, spanning issues from privacy to drones and now on telecom issues. John, I've always admired your honest and careful engagement, and I'm really glad to partner with you today. And later we're going to hear from John's colleague, Chris Laughlin, who's a noted Colorado law alum and a member of the Silicon Flatirons family. So I'm going to turn it over to John to provide some further opening remarks and introduce our distinguished keynote speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amie, for the kind words. And thank you, everyone on the Silicon Flatirons team. It has been a pleasure to coordinate with you. You are truly experts at this and make everything so easy for us. And I in particular want to call out Amie and thank her because she is responsible, and credit is due to her, for securing our exceptional keynote speaker, who I'll have the pleasure of introducing shortly. But before we get there, I know Amie touched on this a bit, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time setting the table for us. And because we have people who are knee-deep in this issue, and then we have people who are coming to it new. So we want to set the table by first describing what the digital divide is. And it's a term, right? It's a term that's been coined to describe the gap between those who have services and devices that allow them to connect and participate in today's internet-driven economy and society, and those who do not. And as a result of not having those devices and not having access, are getting left behind. And we've all heard about the COVID-19 pandemic. And how it is made more clear than ever just how wide and deep this divide is, right? Many Americans remain unconnected, and that's disproportionately true for people of color and those in rural areas. And increasingly, the concept of broadband as a necessity is being viewed just like water and electricity access, right? It's now entering the mainstream that this is a utility type functionality without getting into the utility regulation aspects of it. It's as important as water and electricity, I think people have come to agree on. And because the lack of broadband access is so disproportionate for people of color, more and more people are viewing this as a civil rights issue. And so policymakers, businesses, and advocates have been striving to solve this digital divide for quite some time now, and yet it persists, right? And today's event, what we're going to try and do is bring together a wide array of stakeholders and advocates who've been working on these issues to talk about the state of the divide, where we stand now, and what the current thinking is on the divide, and what we should do in the future to address it. So while the emphasis over the past 4 years has been on deploying broadband networks in rural America, an important and necessary goal, there's been a recent shift in focus toward affordability, right? And this has most prominently been evidenced, I think, by recent legislation. And Congress had passed two pieces of legislation that created two different programs, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And the FCC is working now to launch those programs and to oversee them. And those programs will do a good deal to create connectivity for people who are trouble affording it today. But those are temporary programs. We need to think about longer term solutions, and that's some of the stuff that you're going to be hearing about from our panelists today. Based on these pieces of legislation, other activity on the Hill, and activity at the FCC, it's my sense that there's an emerging consensus, and importantly, an increasingly bipartisan appetite to address the affordability gap, which actually impacts by some measures at least 3 times as many people as don't have access, physical access to networks, right? So this is by some measure, the much bigger aspect of the affordability gap is a much bigger aspect of the digital divide. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. And to kick things off, I'm very fortunate, and we are all very fortunate to have a fierce advocate for expanding broadband and access and connectivity in Congress, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon. Senator Wyden co-authored the emergency broadband benefit legislation, and he has been on the leading edge in thinking about longer-term solutions for the digital divide. During his time in Congress, including his 25 years in the United States Senate, he also has been a leader on other tech policy issues, having co-authored pioneering tech legislation, including Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, the Senate's first net neutrality bill, and the law allowing digital signatures. The law, many of these things actually enable the internet to work today in the way we know it to work. Senator Wyden has graciously agreed to give some remarks today and also to take some audience questions following that. So please use the Q&A function in your, on your screens, and I'll be looking for those questions. And we'll be getting those to Senator Wyden when he is through with his remarks. And with that, it's my great honor to introduce Senator Wyden.
I'm going to turn it back over to John. We will interrupt a little bit when the senator joins us, but let's go ahead and start off with introducing the folks you're going to hear from afterward. Go ahead, John.
Sure. Quick transition. Obviously, we'll break when Senator Wyden is ready to deliver his keynote session. Although we have a great panel for you, and we don't want to sort of eat all the way into our networking session, which is also an important opportunity for everyone to talk about these issues. So with this, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Chris Laughlin, who's going to introduce our panelists and get into the panel. And again, when Senator Wyden is ready to deliver the keynote address, we will break in and we'll get that to you, and then you can continue with the panel. So Chris, please take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, John. I'm going to do a little bit of a table setting for the potential panel conversation that we'll have in a moment here. As John said at the outset, the focus over the past 4 years has largely been on deployment, and I'll add that over that same period, the FCC's Lifeline program, the only universal service program designed to make connectivity affordable, has largely languished, and other efforts to extend connectivity through the E-rate program were stifled. The EBB and ECF programs, the Emergency Broadband Benefit and Emergency Connectivity Fund that the FCC has introduced, both took bold new approaches to bring affordable connections to more people faster and with greater benefits to the intended recipients, at least as compared to the respective analogs, Lifeline and E-rate. Yet when those new programs run their course, we'll still be relying on Lifeline and E-rate to close the digital divide. And that means we'll still have a Lifeline program with a 9.25 broadband benefit that barely provides a basic level of connectivity, an E-rate program that can't be extended to close the homework gap, and a contributions base that is unstable. At the same time, the increased reliance on broadband at home brought on by the pandemic is expected to continue. And it seems clear that if we're going to close the digital divide for good, permanent solutions are needed. But there remains a lot of uncertainty about just what those solutions should be. So I'm excited to have an excellent group of panelists joining me to talk about the state of the digital divide, the two new programs, and what those solutions might look like. You can, of course, find their full bios on the Silicon Flatirons event page. I would love to do some brief introductions, and if you all could jump on screen as I introduce you, and we can get underway. And and then perhaps we'll pause if Senator Wyden, if and when Senator Wyden is able to join us. So first of all, we have Kate Black. She is the Acting Chief Policy Advisor to FCC Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. She has no doubt been working feverishly to implement the EBB and ECF programs, which are actively being launched right now. Second, we have Jose Cortez. He is an entrepreneur who is the Chief Strategy Officer and General Counsel of Telecom Service Bureau, which provides Lifeline service through its affiliate, Easy Wireless. He also serves as chair of the Regulatory and Government Affairs Committee on the National Lifeline Association. I'm going to pause right here. I see that we have Senator Wyden joining us here. We'll finish up the introductions after Senator Wyden's remarks. Thanks so much, everyone.
What is your pleasure, Chris? Would you like me to hold forth here at this point, or John?
Yes, please take it away. John did an intro for you. John, do you want to?
Yes, welcome, Senator. We have given you the intro and we have set the table, reminding everybody of your role in the EBB program and other tech policy legislation, including Section 230 and e-sign, and that your commitment to connecting Americans both through network access and affordability. So please take it away.
John, thank you. And this is a terrific group. And why don't I spare you the filibusters? You know, there's a lot of talk in Washington about filibusters. I'll spare you one and just give you a few thoughts, and then we can throw it open and make sure that that folks who are following the discussion can be part of it. First, big thanks to Amie and the Silicon Flatirons for hosting the event. And I'll tell you, this whole question of the digital divide is so important, because what strikes me, and I just came off 13 town hall meetings at home, this comes up everywhere. There are so many dead spots all across the state, and for the last year I've been doing town hall meetings by Zoom, and pretty much everywhere I go, you know, Coos Bay or Deschutes County or Union County, Jackson County, people are always asking about broadband. And my take is that absent a much more activist policy where we use the machinery of government to create, for example, broadband that really gets into every nook and cranny of our country, we will increasingly be moving to an information aristocracy in our country. And I know that's not what people participating in this discussion want, and it's certainly not good for the country. And what it will mean is that those who are affluent, people who are well off, say in Beverly Hills, California, will have access to this incredible technology treasure trove where they get high speed and all kinds of incredible services. And increasingly, you'll have folks in rural America or inner city kids that can't afford broadband and connectivity. Their families can't, and when the library closes, their back is up against the library building because they like to be able to catch some of the bleed and be able at least to have some way to do their homework. And we've got to have concrete policies that really address these issues. So let me give a couple of ideas by way of getting this started. The first point I want to make is, as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I have said that every single time anybody talks about infrastructure, which is always roads and bridges and what people normally think of as infrastructure, I'm going to insist that there be a major broadband provision that expands the opportunity to build out what's necessary to serve every part of this country. And I'm going to adhere to that pledge until America gets to the point where we decided we had to go decades ago, and we said electricity is something that every American is entitled to, and we achieve that goal. And until we get to that point with respect to broadband, as long as I'm chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, every infrastructure package is going to include broadband until we get to that important time when broadband gets treated like electricity. Now, a couple of other points is that obviously we've got to take steps along the way that expand benefits to vulnerable people, and that's what my authorship of the $3.2 billion bill that created the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program does. EBB, as it's come to be known, provides a $50 a month subsidy, $75 on tribal lands for working Americans who, for example, are struggling, laid off during the pandemic, had problems working remotely because they haven't had connectivity. Their kids have had problems learning. And I was especially proud that the program that I authored provides an additional benefit for a device like a laptop to eligible households to ensure that the families have the hardware that they need to look for a job, complete online homework assignments, be able to tap the fruits of telehealth. And that also, for a bit of good news, that broadband benefit is launching today. So we're making sure that providers are signed up, consumers know about the advantage of the new benefit. And I want to give the chair of the FCC a lot of credit, who's been rolling up our sleeves and working to get the benefit off the ground. Benefit, of course, as a program is temporary. So with the affordability crisis not going away anytime soon, I'm going to be pushing to ensure that policies going forward also build on what has been done today. And I'm working with some of our champions like Maria Cantwell and Ed Markey to craft some additional policies to support low-income families to stay online. Stay tuned. That's only one aspect of improving access. The next, of course, is net neutrality. And net neutrality is exactly the kind of concept you pursue if you don't want to have an information aristocracy. Net neutrality has meant, and when I go out and speak to high schools and students talk to me about it, I said, let's make it real simple. After you pay your internet access fee, you get to go where you want, when you want, and how you want. And Donald Trump's Federal Communications Commission kneecapped the Federal Communications Commission's ability to effectively police the broadband, marketplace. And it was no surprise that what you had with that Federal Communications Commission under Donald Trump overturning net neutrality was that the big internet providers responded by squeezing consumers to pad their profits. They hiked prices, instituted unnecessary data caps, imposed punitive charges on their customers. So millions were isolated. And of course, this was right at a time when the internet was even more important than ever. So restoring net neutrality and classifying the ISPs as Title II common carriers is, in my view, essential to give the Federal Communications Commission the tools it needs to protect consumers against, what are really the tactics of vampires. Now, I think the other point that I'd want to make mention of is the fact that rural America and lower income, communities, without first-class infrastructure, are in effect communities that can become sacrifice zones. And as long as I'm chairman of the Finance Committee, I'm not going to let that happen. Already, we're seeing that rural Americans in many instances have shorter life spans, more chronic health care conditions, fewer economic opportunities, fewer educational opportunities. That isn't right. So apropos of that big challenge that I just mentioned with respect to what we're going to do, every time anybody mentions the question of broadband in the Senate Finance Committee, is we've got a big goal looking down the road to say we've got to treat broadband like our country did decades ago, electrification. We're going to give help along the way in terms of the EBB program, which starts today. We're going to unravel some of the flawed policies of the Trump years, such as how they tried to dismantle net neutrality, which is the essence of fairness and egalitarian communications policy. And suffice it to say, this is a time when all of you with your ideas and suggestions can come forward to people like me, Senator Cantwell, Senator Markey, and others. Give us bold, aggressive ideas, and we'll be looking at ways to bridge the political divide by taking aggressive steps that actually improves people's lives, avoids that information aristocracy that I'm trying to tell people is what you get if you don't give everybody in America the opportunity to get ahead. And no area is better suited for bold, aggressive action than broadband. So let's use this as kind of an opening salvo, and softball questions will be especially welcome. And let's talk about what all the folks who are listening and people who are fans of Silicon Flatirons want to talk about.
Well, thank you, Senator Wyden, for those wonderful remarks. We have a short opportunity to take a couple of questions, and as is tradition at Silicon Flatirons, we're going to take our first question from a student, and I believe we have Sloan Drye joining us on screen. Sloan, the stage is yours. First question.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you for being here today. My name is Sloan Drye. I'm a rising 3L at Colorado Law. This is a really important topic to me. In fact, while I worked at AT&T in the Federal Regulatory Department last summer, my summer project was on Lifeline. Specifically, the question that I have for you today is, how are we going to pay in order to subsidize for not only urban areas, but rural areas billing? It is hard to get not only the infrastructure put in place, but then people willing to pay for broadband. I believe it was in upwards of 20% of the tax that's put on to people who use landline phones. It's not feasible to be able to pay for Lifeline through those mechanisms anymore. And so my question to you is, how do you believe that we would be able to pay for something like this moving forward?
Well, I think clearly it's going to require a massive investment. The federal government has got to be a partner in this. The telecommunications industry has got to be a partner in it. I'll give you kind of my shorthand sort of take. I get often asked about, well, who does that mean? I think it means every single technology. Let's talk about satellite providers, for example, that has the capacity to connect folks to the internet ought to be part of the solution in terms of generating the funds. In other words, I wouldn't take any technology off the table with respect to your very good question, Sloan, about who ought to be part of the partnership. And the companies behind the newest technologies, satellite is one, they're making some pretty big promises about what they're going to be able to do in the marketplace and promising people incredibly quick speeds. And they're saying, oh, we're going to have lower latency is a fancy, tech word. And, previously, let's bring all of those new technologies to bear in terms of having to put up money for investments that they're going to do very well at. And by the way, I also think that the government should keep a close eye on the rollout of these new technologies to make sure that the consumer, who also will have to cover a portion of it, gets what they've paid for.
Thank you, Senator. That answered my question.
Well, it's great question. It lays out the sort of universe of how you make a big investment in America. Great question.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Sloan for president.
Thank you, Sloan. Senator Wyden, I've got two more questions, and one is a nice follow-up to that, and your comments in particular about reclassification of broadband as a Title II service. And the question is, would moving broadband to Title II help smooth the way for fixing universal service funding by spreading the burden and making broadband services be part of the contribution base? Do you support doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's in effect, you know, what it does is if you restore net neutrality, and I've told you that I think it's about the single best antidote to this information aristocracy kind of threat. Classify the ISPs as Title II common carriers. In effect, you lay the foundation for saying everybody again is going to have to be part of a payment kind of arrangement in order to ensure basic fairness. We're going to expand access. Somebody's going to have to pay. I just answered the question with respect to Sloan that I think that we've got to have a payment system that particularly ensures that every new provider who says they're going to be better and faster than anybody else starts paying their fair share.
One more question, if you have time, Senator Wyden, and it is this. I opened up the conversation today by framing the digital divide and describing one aspect of it that is, where you don't have network access, right? We're building networks where they don't exist today. The other aspect I described in terms of affordability. But the question comes from the audience today. It says access and adoption are the two sides of the broadband policy problem. And the latter, adoption, is often reframed as affordability instead. And the questioner says, this constrains the solution space in a way that won't get to all the root issues. So he says, research from the Technology Policy Institute and others show that lowering prices alone will not lead to universal adoption. There are other things keeping people off the internet besides affordability. How is Congress and the administration thinking about tackling the adoption problem holistically? That's the question for you.
Well, I'm interested in what they think are the other reasons behind affordability, other than affordability, that keep people from adopting. I mean, look, we know in this country, there's a mistrust of major institutions. I happen to think on the vaccine issue that some of the education effort wasn't handled as well as it might have been, and this could be relevant to this. I mean, in other words, we saw news story after news story of big celebrities and basketball players and others, their arm would get jabbed and everybody would say, see, so-and-so, got the vaccine, got the shot, so you should do it. And nowhere near as much attention was given to kind of making people feel comfortable about it and might be hesitant. I still think that affordability is the principal challenge for adoption. In other words, I bump up against very few people, and I've had like 970 town meetings, John, open to everybody, where people say, hey, look, the reason that I'm not signing up for broadband is because of something other than affordability. That they tell me the main thing is they just can't afford it. They're on a tight budget. They've got student debt, for example. They got furloughed and they can't get a job at their old kind of wage. I think obviously there is a big education challenge to describe to people what the fruits of this technology treasure trove can mean. In other words, there are seniors, there are a whole group of others who say, this really isn't for me, and I'm just fine living my life the way I'm living. I will tell you, I've not seen any research that indicates that something other than affordability is even close as a barrier to adoption. But I'm convinced that there's an education issue, and that's why I mentioned the analogy to vaccines. I'm not sure enough was done to try to show people how it could be done in a more comfortable way, other than just seeing a celebrity on TV getting their arm jabbed.
Senator, I think that's a great answer. I think, in addition to affordability, certainly trust, right? Education, relevance, digital readiness, right? And I think one of the things that we have seen in the emergency broadband legislation is actually, for some folks, it's devices, right? They also don't have the devices. In addition to being unable to afford the service, it's being unable to afford the devices. So that is
and that's why we provide in EBB the additional benefit for a device like a laptop. And the point really is, it's like a lot of these issues, there probably isn't any one single factor that is applicable to every instance where you haven't seen pickup or adoption the way you'd like. I've told you what I think the driver is, but I think you outlined the 3 or 4 other aspects of it that pretty clearly are challenges.
Right. Well, Senator, thank you so much for your wonderful remarks today and spending time with us and answering some questions from the audience. Very much appreciated, and we appreciate your leadership on these issues. And I'll be watching for next steps from Congress on broadband and the fight against the information aristocracy going forward. So thanks again.
Well, and thank you to Silicon Flatirons. Normally, if you're the chairman of a committee, you're supposed to give a closing address and all that. And these things are just ghastly affairs. Everybody is just comatose after some chairman starts doing it. I just want to say thank you. I think what you all do to give a chance to air the issues is so valuable, and particularly to focus on the digital divide and what are the nuts and bolts of conquering it is hugely helpful. So big thanks.
Thanks again, Senator.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Okay, with that, I think we'll go back to Chris. I think great remarks from the Senator, very relevant to set the tune for some of the questions you're about to ask the panel. Information aristocracy is a term that hadn't sort of resonated yet with me, but I understand it certainly, and I look forward to figuring out and working with people so that it doesn't happen. So back to you, Chris. Thanks.
Thanks. And panelists can join me as well. One of the other comments that Senator Wyden that stuck out to me was he said to come to him with bold, aggressive ideas to close the digital divide. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get into that a little bit during our conversation with our panelists. As I mentioned a little bit earlier in the event, we have Kate Black with us, Acting Chief Policy Advisor to FCC Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel, Jose Cortez with Telecom Service Bureau and the National Lifeline Association. I didn't get to Claire Park. She is the Policy Program Associate at New America's Open Technology Institute. She just co-authored an excellent report titled How to Revive the FCC's Lifeline Program, and previously co-authored a broadband cost study that the White House cited on Instagram just last week. And finally, we have Trinity Thorpe. She is the Senior Director of Comcast's Internet Essentials Program, which brings affordable high-speed internet to people's homes. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. A couple of quick notes before I start on the questions. First, to the audience, you can find reading materials from each of our guest organizations on the Silicon Flatirons event page. Second, please continue to enter your questions into the Q&A throughout the conversation. John is going to be monitoring that and may interject with some questions throughout, and we may also try to save some time for questions at the end. So with that, let's jump into it. So for this first question, I'd love to get everyone's thoughts on it, but I'm going to start with you, Trinity. Given all the focus on connectivity and affordability, are we at an inflection point where you think policymakers and stakeholders of all persuasions are ready to work together and create these bold, aggressive ideas that Senator Wyden was talking about to close the digital divide? Or will the political will stall as we return to some normalcy after the effects of the pandemic have subsided?
Thank you, Chris, for having me, and Amie as well. This is such an honor to be a part of this panel, and it was wonderful to hear from Senator Wyden. And to jump right into your question, I think, yes, we are at an inflection point. You know, it's a real turning point, I think not just in education and in work, but a super big turning point in broadband. And I think it's all, you know, safe to say that ubiquitously on this panel and for all the participants who are listening, that this pandemic really highlighted the need to get everybody connected. And when it comes to the digital divide, at Comcast, we really see three persisting connectivity gaps. Those gaps, which were referenced in Senator Wyden's address and in some of the commentary from John, are in deployment, adoption, and then digital literacy or digital skills training. And you know, you got to this idea of how do we make sure we're not losing momentum, and that after the pandemic, we don't come out of this worse off than we were before, or exactly where we were before. And I think we missed the opportunity to make a real lasting impact and take advantage of this inflection point if we don't think holistically about the problem and about the solutions, or if we only try to solve one aspect of it. If we try and really address the connectivity gaps that I just mentioned, but then we fail to take advantage of the strengths and resiliency and the innovation that are in the broadband ecosystem, I think we're at a disadvantage as well. And then finally, if we're only really thinking temporarily about the solution, we miss the opportunity to really solve it for the long term. We heard one of the questions come in about the difference between affordability and adoption. And I think, you know, for us, and we've been at this for 10 years with the Internet Essentials program, it is not as simple as affordability. That's one piece, but it's really not the only one. And over the past decade, as we've connected 10 million low-income people to the internet through this program, through Internet Essentials, Comcast has really learned a lot of lessons. One of the most recent lessons was with our rollout of the Internet Essentials Partnership Program, which is part of our COVID response. And the Internet Essentials Partnership Program enables schools and school districts and other entities to be able to connect large numbers of students through a sponsorship model. So basically, this was a program designed to give internet to families at no cost to them. One of the first things that we realized is that people weren't connecting to the program when it was offered to them at no cost. And so we wanted to know why. And of the people who were connecting, who were they? And what we found out is that we were really good at migrating customers who were already Internet Essentials customers into this program, but we weren't so good at finding and connecting the new ones. And so we embarked on a study, and it was actually released earlier today, and I'm really excited to share, and it's with our partners over at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group. And they highlighted awareness, clarity, trust, and structural factors as the additional barriers. Once you've removed cost as a barrier, that these are the additional barriers that keep people from accessing the internet. And it's a very interesting and telling narrative, and I encourage everybody to go and read it. So without getting into it, I will just leave with this. We hope that, you know, the participants who are listening to this call and those who are interested in this fixing the broadband gap and fixing adoption would take a look at this research and the blueprint that we've really created over the past 10 years, running what the NAACP called the largest experiment to close the digital divide, to help gain insights into the rollout of EBB and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So I'll leave you with that, but definitely an inflection point.
Thanks, Trinity. Yeah, so, and I think I want to go to Claire next. It would be helpful, I think, if you could address the initial question, which is whether you think we're at this inflection point. Trinity seems to think so, but we also have this sort of running theme developing from Senator Wyden's speech and the question that he had about whether we should be just focused on affordability or if there are other factors that we should be considering. So I'm wondering if you can speak to both of those.
Yeah, thanks so much again for inviting me on this panel. I'm really excited for the discussion this afternoon. I think to the first question, I would agree with Trinity that this is a major inflection point. I'm just going to simply point to the fact that there was bipartisan support for the emergency broadband benefit, which passed Congress last winter, and getting consensus around that kind of sum of money is definitely not trivial, and I think it bodes pretty well for getting significant action done in the future too. Not to mention what's happened with the passage of the Emergency Connectivity Fund as well. So I'm pretty hopeful about using the momentum that we have now to protect and expand more equitable access to broadband. That said, I guess this growing theme. I think honestly, pitting the two is kind of misunderstanding how they're really intertwined. Like, affordability is inherently a part of getting people to adopt broadband, and adoption includes making sure that people can afford service. So kind of asking the question about whether they're mutually exclusive sort of, I think, underestimates the fact that when you have a service that is offered on the market, you need to be able to buy that service to have access, simply put. So I think the focus on affordability right now in this moment with these programs is really essential given the needs of the moment right now. I think we can't deny the kind of economic impact that the negative economic impact that the pandemic has had on our society. I mean, the unemployment numbers are crazy, and we're seeing just like as things open up again, people are still very, very vulnerable, and I think that making sure that people can afford this service that we've all agreed on across both sides of the aisle is essential, is like a primary concern right now. Going forward, I think that affordability will remain a key part of addressing the broadband space, but I don't disagree with Senator Wyden and Trinity, and I'm sure all the other panelists, that there are also other parts of this problem as well, and we need to definitely look holistically at how we can support, for instance, digital literacy and skills, and how we can build out networks or support communities building out networks where no service exists. So that's my answer.
All right, thank you. Jose, what are your thoughts on this? Is holistic view, should the main focus be on affordability? Are we at this inflection point?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I do want to start by thanking the organizers for inviting NALA to participate in this event. Thank you, Amie and the Flatirons team. We're honored to be a part of this distinguished panel, and we're excited to talk about these issues. Chris, I hope we're at an inflection point. The policymakers, I hope that, they don't think that our nation's digital divide problem is resolved when the pandemic is no longer at the forefront, because it won't. This has been a problem for years, long before the pandemic. But it does appear that the Republicans, Democrats are more aware of the affordability issues in our nation, and that there is a real desire to address it. We just need to make sure that the focus is on affordability. We heard that today from Senator Wyden. A lot of the research papers and white papers that I've read talk about how affordability is the number one cause. And I've certainly seen this firsthand in the state of Washington, in Oklahoma, in Mississippi, in all of the states that I've traveled to where we distribute Lifeline service. So again, I hope we are at an inflection point, and I hope that the end of the pandemic doesn't stop the discussion.
Great, thank you. Kate, so we have 3 votes for inflection points. Do you agree? And what of these other factors that we should be considering?
Well,
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. As folks have pointed out, today is the launch of the emergency broadband benefit, so I've had a lot of coffee, and I'm super excited to talk about these issues because it's a big day for the affordability issue, not only at the FCC, on this panel, and across the country, as hopefully millions of people are able to receive a $50 to $75 benefit on their monthly internet service. That's huge. You know, we can't underestimate the size of this benefit and what it could mean for families and households across the nation who have been struggling during this pandemic. So yes, absolutely, echo what everyone has said about an inflection point. And also I think, you know, there are a lot of factors that go into the conversation around broadband adoption. It is a multi-pronged kind of issue for sure, and they do intersect in unique ways, but you still see cost as a barrier. And I think that's something that the EBB certainly focuses on. But I think, as has been said by the other panelists, certainly after we get out of this pandemic, cost is still going to be an issue. Access is still going to be an issue, and I'm sure we're going to talk about all of that. But, you know, the pandemic, I think, like so many things, has really shown a light on the utility of broadband, the importance of internet access for so much of modern life. And, you know, I think it was really telling in a survey that was done by the Pew Research Center during the pandemic that 1/3 of households were worried about paying their internet bill. That number spikes to over 50% when Hispanics were asked. I think it was 36% of African Americans had that same concern, and over 1/3 of women also had that concern. So 1 in 3 is nothing to ignore. It is something to address, and I'm excited that the EBB is going to help with that, but there's obviously going to be more work ahead.
That sounds good. So I wanted, for this next question, I want to acknowledge that there's agreement that there's a lot of different factors that are going into this. I am going to focus a little bit on affordability, but I'm sure these other holistic approach factors will come up throughout the conversation. But I kind of want to ask, what is affordability? What does it mean to be to have affordable broadband? And Claire, I want to turn this to you to begin with. I mentioned at the outset that you had worked on this cost study for broadband. So if you could address that.
Yeah, for sure. I guess just to frame the conversation, I mean, what is affordable to someone depends on kind of their means, but I think what's important here is that now that we've established that broadband is absolutely essential infrastructure, I think that means that anything essential means that we have to make sure that everyone has access to it. So that means that whatever affordability means to each person, they just need to have the means to have the resource. So that said, according to our research, which we published last summer, the average price of internet service right now in the country is $68.38. And comparing that to the what was the only subsidy for consumers at the time, which was the Laughlin subsidy of $9.95, that only covers 13% of the average cost of service that we found. So that is definitely not affordable for low-income households, undeniably. And I mean, as Kate mentioned, 1/3 of households reported that they were really scared about managing their internet bills. So I'm not going to name a dollar amount because I think, once again, that kind of runs counter to the framing that I've given here about what it means for something to be affordable. But whatever it takes, like people need to be able to get the service. So yeah, that's my short answer.
Thanks. Trinity, do you have a different perspective?
Thank you for coming around to me. So I just want to go back to the Internet Essentials program, and we've been running the program for the past 10 years, and we've never changed the price of it. And that price is a little less than $10 a month. And for some people, that's attainable. And for others, we know that that's really not attainable. And there's been a significant amount of research around this. On some of the research, especially the early on research that helped inform the creation of Internet Essentials, really led us to understand that there are some people who will not adopt regardless of price. And so I keep that in mind when I think about the affordability issue, and really try to concentrate and conceptualize this idea that we have to keep the price low enough for the most vulnerable populations, those who are most underrepresented, to be able to participate, while also remembering that there are some out there who won't adopt unless we address the holistic issues.
Okay, thank you. So I want to turn to talk about the new programs, but Jose or Kate, if you have any thoughts on that question, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can jump onto the talking a little bit more about EBB and ECF. Okay. So as has been mentioned, EBB launched today. The FCC just adopted its ECF rules on May 10th, meaning statutory deadline. And before we get to the FCC and what the FCC has done, I want to focus a little bit on Congress. I think Senator Wyden has left the call, so you don't need to be shy. And actually, maybe Jose, I'll start with you. Did Congress make the right choices with these programs, or what could it have done differently?
Generally, yes. I think Congress made the right choice to act and to just make sure that all Americans have access to broadband and have broadband connectivity. All of NALA's Lifeline ETC members are approved EBB providers, and they will be providing EBB services to their qualifying subscribers. So yeah, we believe that they did. We're not in the ECF space because we believe that Lifeline can solve the homework gap problem. But yeah, generally, yes, we believe they did.
Okay. And Claire, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. We are definitely a bit of an echo. I don't know, Jose. Sorry, not to silence you. We absolutely support both of the programs. I think kind of my lasting gripe is simply that at OTI, at least, we asked for increased support through both these programs a long time ago. So given that the coronavirus reached the U.S. Last March, it was a little bit frustrating to have things take so long. So I think going forward, we would just like to see now, once again, that we have bipartisan support for the fact that broadband is an essential service. Just a lot more agile leadership, making sure that we get these kinds of temporary programs out sooner so that people aren't struggling for longer.
Trinity, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Congress and whether they got it right, but why don't we dive into the FCC? What are your thoughts or your view on its implementation of the programs? Was it on target, or would you have liked to see different outcomes?
Thanks for that question. As many of you know, Comcast will be participating in the FCC's new emergency broadband benefit. And we do also plan to participate in the Emergency Connectivity Fund as well. And, I really commend the FCC for taking these steps and for standing up this program in record time. Kate, I know you and your team have worked incredibly tirelessly to get this done. I know the long nights and weekends that my own team and other teams at Comcast have experienced in order to implement as well. And we are so excited that, I'm getting these regular updates about how many people we are getting applications for in through EBB, and it's so exciting to see them roll in. So really, really welcome this and feel like the FCC has done a tremendous job in terms of outreach and working with partners to understand how best to implement. And, we're not always going to get it right straight out of the gate. We certainly didn't get it right straight out of the gate with the Internet Essentials program, and we're constantly going to evolve. And what works now and what works for the next 3 to 5 years might not work in 10 years. And so we're going to have to keep evolving and moving forward to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the people who are most vulnerable.
So, Kate, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you about what you think about the FCC's implementation of the programs. But I would like to jump off of Trinity's point just then. She talked about what works now and what would work in the future, and whether you think these programs could serve as a model for the future, or you think that you agree with her point that we need to kind of be agile on that.
Well, I think both things can be true at the same time, right? I think, and appreciate that, Trinity, and for the other panelists too, their kind words about, the implementation of, really, this is a $10 billion investment week for the government putting into broadband and getting people connected in this country, which is more money than we've seen in a long time at once. So it's exciting. But I think we want to learn from the EBB. We want to learn and see where the data comes from and how people apply and where they apply and what obstacles they face so that we can inform other programs moving forward. I think we can be nimble and adjust and be data driven all at the same time so that the solutions that we provide for households who are struggling to connect today can be better off for the solutions that we do down the road. And I think that's something that the acting chairwoman has spoken a lot about, and I'm really wanting to make sure that we are using all the resources, all the feedback we receive from our partners, from providers, from users, to inform the program and shape it for the long haul.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jose, Trinity mentioned that that Comcast is involved in the EBB program. I'm wondering if you can speak to whether Easy Wireless, your ETC, is involved with that, or any other entity at TSB. And in addition to that, maybe unpack this idea of the program. So obviously, Kate mentions that we're going to learn a lot over the course of these two programs. But what's your initial take on what's good about these programs and what's important about them, especially compared to the existing Lifeline program?
Sure, but I think it's important for me to go back and echo what Trinity said, because it really does have to be emphasized that standing up the program, the EBB program, in the short time frame that was given was an enormous undertaking. We greatly appreciate what the FCC, its staff, and USAC has done in all of their efforts. And we also appreciate, as a part of the implementation process, that it has adopted systems and rules that are currently used in the Lifeline program, which I think are important because those are proven systems that have worked, specifically the National Verifier and the National Lifeline Accountability Database. Again, two systems that are going to be a part of this, and so we were thrilled to see that. We are an approved EBB provider, and we're excited about the program. Our ETC is licensed in 4 states: Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and Kentucky. Before EBB, less than 2% of our Lifeline enrollments were outside the state of Oklahoma, less than 2%. We have significantly ramped up our distribution in Missouri and Arkansas, and we expect our enrollment mix to be much heavier in Missouri and Arkansas going forward. So yeah, we're in it, and we're excited about the program. Regarding your question about, what's the difference and what's important about the two programs, I think when you compare the EBB program to Lifeline, it's one thing, and from my perspective, it's one big thing, and that's funding. If funding wasn't right, you would not have 825 providers taking part in the EBB program. It just would not happen. The reason that only 20% of eligible households participate in Lifeline is because of funding. And if you dive deeper into that number, that 20% number, you'll find that a great majority of those participating households are located in California and Puerto Rico, where there are state funds, and Oklahoma due to the enhanced tribal reimbursement. So, is the EBB funding right? Yes. When compared to $9.25, absolutely it is. But is it the right amount for a single mother raising 3 school-age kids with homework? No. So, these are important issues. I think important issues that need to be addressed by the FCC. These are issues that NALA has outlined in its petition for rulemaking. specifically, additional funding for Lifeline when EBB ends and the funding ends, but also the one per household rule.
All right, thanks. And I promise we will get to funding a little bit more at the end of the conversation. But Trinity, I want to go to you because I know, I think that Comcast, I sort of perused your comments on the EBB, and it allows providers that are not ETCs to get involved in the program. So maybe you can speak a little bit too to what's sort of different and important about these two programs compared to the existing programs, and what attracted Comcast to get involved.
Yeah, we're just very excited to be able to participate in this. I think it gives an opportunity for households to engage with programs that they normally might not be eligible for, and certainly with the Internet Essentials program, and also with the other programs offered via the FCC. And so this is a very exciting moment for households to be able to take advantage of what the Internet has to offer. And we are very, very grateful to be able to participate. And we're trying to get the word out in a number of ways. One is through the xfinity.com/EBB website that we've stood up, which provides a very simple way and path forward for households to get signed up who are interested in doing so. And we're really grateful for the kind of foundation website that offers folks information through getemergencybroadband.com, which we kind of link into as well. And then we are also really working with, and it gives us an opportunity to work with our partners in a new way. Internet Essentials has always been kind of a partner-based organization. We've worked with a network of tens of thousands of partners throughout its trajectory. And this allows us to think about those partnerships and to think about outreach in a way that's a little bit different. And so we're working with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance to raise awareness about EBB, provide training on BBB to nonprofits and community-based organizations and others. And we're also working with Common Sense Media and to reach consumers directly with information through PSAs and through social media. And what's, I think, really cool about both of these is that they allow us to not only reach directly to the consumer, but they also allow us to really target our network and lean into what we have been traditionally good at, and that's convening partners together and learning from them along the way. So we're excited to participate, and we're excited to see what comes next and accomplish the collective goal of digital equity together.
Great. Claire, I'd like to get your thoughts too. So, Trinity and Jose sort of spoke from the side of the providers, but maybe you can speak from the side of the consumers or from the advocates about what you see as different and important about these two programs, and maybe also take this other question about what these programs mean for the intended beneficiaries and what it might mean when the programs go away.
Yeah. I'm just getting there's a construction situation near me, so it's very distracting, but power tools. So the EBB and ECF are both temporary programs, and both of them rely on / keep many of the elements that exist already in both the Lifeline and E-rate programs, respectively. And so I think I'm also very excited about the programs, and I also agree with the other panelists that the FCC and Kate, your team, is doing really good work on these programs in a very short amount of time. I think that because both of the temporary programs rely so much on existing elements and infrastructure of the two other USF, Universal Service Fund programs, that OTI at least would like to maintain kind of a set of recommendations that we have had before for Lifeline and E-rate going forward. And so, for instance, to get kind of nitty gritty, I think that one thing that we're really trying to see going forward is updates to the National Verifier, which is this tool that is used to verify people's eligibility and ID for participating in these programs, and kind of making sure that that kind of information from different databases that help people qualify for the benefits is really crucial, so that it makes it easier for them to get benefits going forward, whether it's through the permanent programs that we have or temporary programs going forward. I think, Chris, I've forgotten the second part of your question.
Well, I was, asking what it meant for intended beneficiaries. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's clear now, but I think just as we move forward into like whatever reopening procedures that there are, I think this will be really essential for students and their families who will be connected through ECF funds to remain in school and whatever like hybrid classroom online learning situation that they have. And also seeing, I mean, the ECF has some significant changes to what existed with E-rate before, and I think those will be important going forward because there were existing issues with the homework gap that weren't addressed by E-rate. So I'm hoping to see some of those changes stay the same. And as for the EBB participants, I mean, $50, like Jose also said, is a significant leg up from the $9.95, basically $10 that existed before, and is a much more comprehensive subsidy for what we found to be kind of the average advertised price for internet service in the country. So we're really hopeful that the kinds of changes that we see in these temporary programs and also the increased financial support will continue going forward.
Great. So,
Chris, can I jump in on this real quick?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to say that as far as what does a program mean for intended beneficiaries? At NALA, for us, it means inclusion. That's a big deal for these subscribers. Without these programs, these people are left out. They're left out of job opportunities. They're left out of training and online learning opportunities. They lose better and consistent access to health care. These are really important things that you need in today's day and age. Nobody applies for a job anymore by sending in their resume by mail. Everything is done through Indeed. And this is a big deal. So for us, what does it mean? It means inclusion, and that's important.
Thank you. And Trinity and Kay, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. I was going to, Claire had mentioned the future moving forward, so I thought we could talk a little bit about that as well. All right, I'll jump to it. Kate had talked about how we're going to be learning a lot from these two new programs through the course of the emergency and their funding. Obviously we may know more about what Lifeline and E-rate and other solutions might look like going forward, but I do want to force the topic a little bit. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts now about whether these programs need upgrades. Are there pieces of the new programs that you already know and believe should be introduced into them for Lifeline and E-rate, or are there other potential solutions? So Trinity, why don't we start with you on that one?
Thank you. So I heard recently, and I'm not fully sure of the exact source for this, but a quote that stood out to me is, the windshield. Why do we have a windshield that is so much bigger than a rear view mirror? And it's because where we are going is so much more important than where we've been in the past. And I think we can all collectively agree that we know about what we know about the broadband adoption space will and has fundamentally changed because of this pandemic. And it will fundamentally change regardless of the programs that we use to really press forward. You started the panel with this idea that we're at an inflection point, or rather the question that we're at an inflection point. And I do believe we are, and I hope that we use this moment as a catalyst to make what we have even better. And I think EBB is a really important step, and I think the Emergency Connectivity Fund is also an important step too. EBB is just temporary. And we are going to learn so much from that, foundation, as Kate had mentioned earlier. It's an opportunity for us to gain a lot. But the country needs a permanent, sustainable, low-income broadband benefit program for long after the pandemic ends. And just like the programs that the government has today, it could match those that are for food or housing or healthcare. And I think Congress should adopt a really long-term federally funded broadband benefit that would provide consumers with a higher monthly benefit than what's currently available through Lifeline, which is $9.25. And I think, to the points that were made earlier, Jose and others would agree with this. And this new program, in my opinion, should have rather a predictable and consistent funding from from Congress, not from Comcast. And it should
have a commitment here.
And it should really be empowering for consumers from the standpoint of having that money directly in their own hands so that they have that consumer choice. I also think that the new program should allow broadband providers to be a part of the solution instead of limiting program participation to just certain types of providers or certain types of technology. And in turn, that restricts customer choice, and we definitely don't want to see that happen. So we're ready to work with policymakers and anyone who's interested to create that predictable, sustainable, long-term benefit that all Americans can realize, so that all Americans rather can realize the long-term benefits of this opportunity.
So, Claire, Trinity talks about a new program, and I mentioned at the top that you had co-authored this paper about reviving Lifeline. Is your sense that the right approach is to stick with Lifeline and make improvements to that program, or do you think there's another solution such as what Trinity put forth?
Yeah, this has become kind of a key talking point within pro-consumer advocacy groups and allies recently. I would say that honestly, I'm currently pretty agnostic. What's clear is simply the fact that some people need more support than they're getting right now. So we need increased subsidies for people who can't afford broadband. That we do have an existing program right now for people to afford telecommunication service, but because of classification of broadband, that is currently somewhat limited. So one way that we could improve upon Lifeline is to restore Title II authority over broadband, which is an issue that has bipartisan support as well, which would make Lifeline also a broadband affordability program, as kind of in the same vein as the emergency broadband benefit is explicitly for broadband as well. So yeah, I think for us, we are also kind of eagerly awaiting to see what happens from EBB, and we'll figure out, I guess, in our coalitions whether we lean one way or the other. But honestly, I think that whatever program that we have, it needs to have the elements that work best for people. So that includes a higher subsidy like we've seen in EBB. That includes like increased provider and consumer participation and other things that we bring up in the Lifeline blueprint, for example.
Kate, I'm going to get to you in just a moment, but I want to turn this question over to Jose about whether I know obviously Lifeline is important to Nala, and whether you think Lifeline is the right way to go about this or there are other solutions.
Sure. I think it's when I look at the EBB program, for me, it's using all of the benefits of all the systems and rules that have been developed through Lifeline, with two additional factors. Number one is a lot more funding, and number two is a streamlined approval process. And so for me, it's the same as Lifeline. I think it's hard to argue that Lifeline couldn't do this, because if you take those two same characteristics and you associate them with Lifeline, you have the same program. So I can tell you that one thing we definitely do not want to go back to is $9.25. That does not work. And all of the research has clearly indicated that that has been the biggest problem. In states like California and Oklahoma, the Lifeline program is working with participation rates at 40, 45, 50%, significantly better than in states like Missouri, where participation is only it's in the mid-teens. So I think that Lifeline can work absolutely post EBB if funding is addressed.
Thank you. So, Kate, I want to turn this question to you as well, but I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. What do you think the FCC can do on its own when these programs, when EBB and ECF go away? Are there things that FCC can do to modify the Lifeline and E-rate programs to go further, to kind of get a little bit closer to what the EBB and ECF programs are, to the extent that we find that they're successful, or do we need congressional action here?
Well, I do appreciate everyone's comments about kind of what comes next. I think I want to kind of suggest what's on our minds, front of mind really today and this week and in the next probably 2 months, is really setting up both programs, getting them off the ground and making sure we're running fair, equitable, efficient programs. I think the conversation about what comes next is certainly one that's going to be had in the record. It's going to be had in Congress. It's going to be had on panels like this. And I think that's wonderful, because we need that robust dialogue to inform what the agency can do and what Congress should do, what the administration's priorities are. But I think we have to make sure that the EBB and ECF programs are successful. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever comes next certainly needs to be informed by successful programs. And so, you know, I really do appreciate everybody on this panel, you know, being so supportive and doing the outreach and making sure that people are aware of this program, because, you know, we want people to sign up, we want people to get the benefit, and we want to learn from that. So for us, you know, in terms of the future, you know, my calendar is really built out in 60-day increments at this point. And, you know, getting these programs off the ground and, again, running them fairly and efficiently is really, really important. And is an important first piece of the long-term conversation.
Fair enough. So I have, I think, one sort of main question to wrap up with before we turn over to audience questions. So if you have questions, you in the audience, please put them in the Q&A now. But the last question is sort of I guess the elephant in the room, perhaps. We've talked a lot of, there seems to be sort of broad agreement that the subsidy needs to be more going forward after these programs wrap up. But into the question that Sloan, a student, had asked earlier on of Senator Wyden, how do we go about paying for this? What are the solutions? And there was a question about whether Title II, turning over to Title II, would allow broadband to come into the contribution space. You know, Trinity, you had mentioned congressional appropriation, but yeah, what are the solutions? And Jose, maybe we can start with you.
Well, let me just start by saying I am certainly no expert in this. I realize how complicated it is. I know that our board has had discussions about this. You know, the number one thing that we always talk about, and it's been talked about for years, is contributions reform. That's a really, really big one. But I mean, could there be some type of hybrid funding where, you know, some from USF and some from congressional funding? Maybe. Another thought maybe is to fund it the same way that the SNAP program is funded, which is funded by, you know, non-discretionary spending. Maybe that's an idea. So, you know, those are my thoughts.
Claire?
Yeah, this is another great question that's often up for discussion in the spaces that I work within. Yes, congressional appropriations is one way, although that would make funding for these kinds of programs up for debate every single year, which might not be sustainable. Another one that actually seems to have come up from a listener is using funds from FCC spectrum auctions, and we actually released a paper about this, suggesting that you could use funds from spectrum and other FCC regulated assets to support a kind of like foundation where it would be endowed, independent, a private charitable foundation, and you could choose where to spend those kinds of profits. That could include broadband, but also include like environmental justice, education, other kind of important causes. So that's, I think, a pretty good alternative. And yeah, of course, there's the option of finally reforming how contributions are made for the Universal Service Fund. So one solution is including broadband providers in there. And yeah, I think one thing that I do want to add while we're already talking about how to fund things is an easy way to fund things is to also make prices more affordable. So that doesn't just include subsidies, but also addressing the kind of factors that lead to increased prices. So that's, for instance, monopolization in the market and addressing the issue of consolidation and making sure that we're really highly regulating proposed mergers and making sure that there are a lot of options for people to choose from when it comes to internet service. So that's my take on funding.
Thanks. So Trinity, you had already sort of mentioned solution. If you want to add more, here's your opportunity.
I don't have more to add. I'd have to defer to my colleagues in policy for that one.
And Kate, I feel like if you have thoughts on this as well, otherwise we'll turn it to audience questions. Okay, thanks. So great conversation, everyone. We're going to turn it over to Brielle Bayens. Hopefully I got that correctly. She's a student at Colorado Law for the first question.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. My name is Brielle. I'm actually an undergrad student at the University of Colorado Boulder. And so the pandemic has shown us how important it is to lessen and ultimately close the digital divide. And I understand that saliency can be very important to solving some public problems and which policies are addressed first. And so my question for you all is, how do we continue to increase awareness and maintain saliency for the public problem of increasing broadband access, especially for rural and low-income families?
Do we have someone that wants to take that first?
Oh, I'll take it. Thank you for the question, Brielle. I mean, I think this is really important. It's something that I work on a lot at the agency, which is really connecting these issues to everyday people's lives, right? Using the power of story and understanding narrative and how we meet people where they are and understand, especially out of this pandemic, because I think it's been raised a bunch about just the utility of broadband during this time, whether it's remote work or telehealth or virtual school or connecting with friends or watching Bridgerton, whatever you do, right? Making sure that you have that ability. And that is an equity issue, it's a justice issue, it's an economic issue, it's a health issue. At the same time, I think, some of these big pivot moments that we've made to online life are not going to go away post-pandemic, right? I think we're going to see telehealth be utilized more, especially for low-income and working parents who may not be able to take time off from work, find childcare, go to the pediatrician for that appointment when they could just do it in their own home maybe. I think schools that have invested a lot into virtual learning options, when we have parent-teacher conference days, when there are snow days, I think we'll see virtual school maybe take the place of those days off. So I think we are going to see, some of that online life continue, and we need 100% of us connected to that and have access to that. And I think building out those narratives and telling those stories just about how important internet access is to you and your family is a big, big piece of that.
And Chris, I'd love to add to that.
Please.
Yeah, Kate, I love the response, and the only thing that I would add to that response is that, you know, when we're thinking about the outreach and the storytelling, to constantly think about it in this really culturally relevant and language relevant way to make sure that we're not leaving any of the populations behind. I know that the FCC has done a tremendous job working with all sorts of diverse partners to make sure that this is accounted for and raising awareness about EBB. And I think that needs to continue when we think about a long-term solution and any new programs that are stood up along the way to address these issues. Our biggest lesson that we've learned in Internet Essentials is the need to work with community-based organizations to build trust. The factor of trust comes up time and time again in terms of raising awareness and helping people to understand that these programs, one, exist, but also that they can trust in these programs and in the providers that they're coming from and in the benefit from the government.
Thanks. So I'm going to acknowledge that we're running a little bit over schedule. We are going to shortly turn to the networking event, and I just want to make sure that you all stick around for that or log into that afterwards. But let's take a couple of more questions or so. John, I know we have some good ones that have come in, but you've been looking at them more closely. Can you help us out?
Sure, there are a couple, and let me start with this one. This one posits it says infrastructure crushes the adoption red herring. Network effects run rampant and deep. And while we've been focused today on adoption and affordability, I don't think our intent was to say that there isn't a problem in terms of people having no network access to high-speed broadband. And so what do you say to folks who say that the adoption problem is a red herring? Anybody want to take that? No, nobody wants to take that.
Sorry, the question is asking or is saying basically focusing too much on issues with adoption, or like. I think
the question is, what is the answer to the question when someone calls the adoption problem a red herring? How do you respond? Do you believe it's a red herring?
I guess this person is maybe concerned with the lack of infrastructure. It sounds like.
Yes, clearly, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, I've always associated the issue of adoption with infrastructure itself as well. So, I mean, deployment is a key part of the broadband sphere as well. So I don't know about red herring. I hope I'm not treating any factor in any of these issues as a red herring. Should there be more focus on infrastructure and build out? I think that there are a great number of funds that the FCC runs for that purpose. I think that one thing that should add to that can help for places that lack infrastructure is honestly more support for community-based broadband networks. So a lot of places that struggle with a lack of infrastructure or simply having only like one person as a potential, one company as a potential provider is there could be like state legal barriers to building your own broadband networks. And we're definitely proponents of communities being able to decide for themselves whether they want to build infrastructure. So yeah, that would be my answer.
John, just to kind of piggyback off of Claire, I think, we're talking a lot about EBB, which is $3.2 billion, talking about ECF, which is $7.1 billion. Let's not forget that the administration has put forth a $100 billion investment in broadband infrastructure. So certainly the way the acting chairwoman has described, you have an adoption and affordability problem. We also have an infrastructure and access problem too. And we can kind of tackle those simultaneously. But I don't want to lose sight that we could possibly see more money put into broadband infrastructure than any other point in our lifetimes, right? So that's huge.
Great, I think so. There are three other questions or threads I want to cover, and I'm going to try and paraphrase some of the questions. And one of the questions sort of reflects, I think, some of the commentary that we've seen in President Biden's commentary about broadband and infrastructure package, and then I believe it was reflected in Senator Wyden's commentary as well, and perhaps in some of your comments as well, is the idea that we pay too much for broadband in this country, and it's too expensive, and that it could come down perhaps, as Claire says, through competition, community-based offered broadband. And so what do people think about that? Should the FCC be looking at competition in the space and potentially regulating broadband prices? Nobody wants to take that. Not yet.
I will.
John, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
I'll at least stress this. I think this question was followed by a specific citation that's a little false. It excludes an important part of the sentence from my study, which says we say that about, so the sentence compares the affordability of service in the US to services advertised in Europe. And crucially, that particular sentence comes from a part where we're talking about cost per megabyte of service. And that's not the way that people actually buy service, I do want to note. So when we talk about affordability, I'm talking about the reality of how people actually pay for service, which at least for me, that is a monthly bill that is not divided by the kind of particular speed that I get. As for, we have never spoken in particular about regulating prices. I think that all that we are trying to do in our research is that, one, it's crucial that we have some comprehensive, consistent federal data on what prices are in this country, and to analyze like what is driving prices up. We want to make sure that people can afford broadband. Subsidies are one part of that answer, but also another part of the answer is lowering the price of the goods being offered. So that's where our argument is.
I know we're running long, so let me get to two more ideas. And one ties together some of the thoughts that we've had and from the opening session and the opening question, which was the two sides of the coin. It may not be appropriate to call one side affordability, but rather adoption, and that there are other reasons besides affordability that people don't sign up to service where services are available. And so the question here asks about the role and posits whether non-adopters need, quote unquote, digital navigators who can help them tap into subsidy programs, basic digital literacy, and tech support. And let me actually throw this out to you, Kate. You know, the FCC has programs, right, to give discounts, Lifeline, right, and to give support for schools and libraries, right? But the FCC does not have any particular program that speaks to digital literacy or this sort of concept of digital navigators. Do you think there's a role for the FCC there?
Well, I think yes, and I think certainly I can speak to this in terms of EBB. You know, we definitely thought a lot about how we can help other people help people sign up for the EBB program. Right. You know, whether that is a child helping an aging parent sign up, whether it's a librarian helping someone who comes to the library to seek service, to get online, to sign up for the program. So we really thought a lot and intentionally about the role of navigators in helping people navigate the EBB, not to overuse the word. We do have some limitations on just how far a navigator can go, and that really centers around kind of attestation of the person signing up for the benefit, you know, to protect the program itself. But, you know, we've set up a lot of mechanisms for people to call a help center if they have questions, to have navigators and do webinars, and really have thought a lot about, for the people who don't have service, who are going to seek out help, where can they find it, and how can we make sure that those people are well equipped to answer questions and navigate the process, because it's not easy.
Appreciate that. I think, Kate, the final question is for you as well, and it's a short one. What quantitative analyses of costs and benefits of the EBB does the FCC or others in government plan to undertake? Are you aware of FCC plans or any other plans?
Well, you know, I spoke a little bit about just the need for, and the acting chairwoman has reiterated this too, the need to look at data and see what's coming in. And I'm not sure if I'm answering the question about, you know, cost-benefit analysis, but I think we want to see, you know, all types of data, whether that is if pockets of the country are signing up for the program at different rates than others, if different communities are signing up at faster rates or not. If people are signing up a lot via mail versus online, and in what language are they doing the application in. I think we want to also hear from providers and their experiences, as well as community organizations and those on the ground who are, you know, hearing firsthand from folks how it's going. So I think we're interested in reviewing all types of data from all types of sources to really inform, what we got right, what we need to revise, and also what we can do for the long term. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I do think the importance of looking at data and being informed is going to help not only this program's success, but also all the work that I think everyone on this panel is interested in doing to connect all Americans.
Great. With that, Chris, I think we've covered most of the themes and the questions, combined a few there, but back to you to wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I think I'm turn it over to you, Amie, perhaps to wrap us up, or someone of Silicon Flatirons. Or not. I appreciate you all.
Sorry, Chris.
No worries.
Stick around for that turn on camera, turn on microphone button. So apologies. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, John, for doing a really excellent job leading this conversation. To all of our speakers, you have done just a phenomenal job, and also with an interruption in the middle of the panel. Thank you for coming out, for joining us, for providing your input and your expertise. And